I'm a member of something called the Parliamentary Lobby Journalists. It's a group of about 140 Westminster-based journalists, often accused of running a sort of secret sect like the Freemasons. But to be honest with you, if you close it down tomorrow, it would reinvent itself. It's actually mostly these days a group of journalists who happen to work in the same building. It's a very easy target to attack. But there are similar groups that work together informally in other specialist areas like health, education, defence and so on. And if you close down the parliamentary lobby system today, it would somehow reinvent itself tomorrow. Personally, I've always argued for reform of the lobby journalists. And to be fair, it's not stood still. When I joined it in 1982, there were very strict rules about how we could describe our contacts with Downing Street. Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister at the time, and when we went to a briefing at 10 Downing Street, we were only allowed to, under the club rules, to describe, attribute the briefings we had to Whitehall sources. Everyone in our world knew who was talking. It was her press secretary, Sir Bernard Ingham. But you couldn't put that in print. If I had put his name in my newspaper, I'd have been taken into a dark room and tortured, which seems absurd now. In 1997, Labour, under Tony Blair, put these lobby briefings on the record, so we're now allowed, since then, been allowed to quote the Prime Minister's official spokesman when we go to the twice-daily briefings with them at 11 o'clock in the morning and about 3:45 in the afternoon. It's hardly a revolution, but what Labour introduced was a small step in the right direction. And it's wrong to see the lobby as part of a cosy club. Maybe it was in bygone days, but those days are long gone. And today, people like myself ask some very searching questions of Downing Street at those twice-daily briefings, and I would argue play an important role in holding the government to account. Of course, there'll always be private, off-the-record conversations between ministers, political advisors, MPs and civil servants on the one hand, and people like me, the journalists on the other. People involved in any walk of life will invariably say more to journalists if they know they will not be quoted by name, as some of you who work in the business will know. Such conversations are mutually beneficial and cannot be regulated away. Although some observers criticise the use of such anonymous sources, I'm sure it helps the press and therefore the public to get closer to the truth. In my job at The Independent, I'm incredibly lucky. My paper lives up to its name. I'm not under pressure to toe a party line. I can write something critical of one party one day and another party the next, which is actually quite rare in today's newspapers in Britain, and my counterparts on other papers are not all so lucky. My proprietor, Evgeny Lebedev, told me to say that before I came here. Sorry, that was a joke. One area where agenda-setting journalism has been overtaken by what I'd call a new agenda-driven journalism is the way most British papers cover the European Union. It's an example of what you might see as newspapers perceiving as their commercial self-interest, trumping their interest in providing balanced and fair reporting. Fear of closer media ownership rules being imposed by the European Commission, the European Union, has helped to drive many newspapers down what I would call a very hardline Eurosceptic path, being opposed to closer engagement with the EU. And the way they cover the EU on their news pages is really designed to push politicians and the public down the same Eurosceptic route. And it's one of the biggest examples of the press being a player rather than a watcher, an observer of the political game. The result, in my view, is a very unhealthy bias in which most newspapers seek to portray the European Union and its institutions in the most unfavourable light. This skewed centre of gravity means that more even-handed papers like my own, The Independent, The Financial Times, The Guardian, can sometimes be dragged down a more Eurosceptic path, which I regret. Well, we meet at a time when, sadly, the reputation of British newspapers, as I'm sure you've observed, is probably at its lowest level for many years, perhaps its lowest level ever. The disclosure that reporters at the News of the World, owned by Rupert Murdoch when it was still going, hacked into the mobile voicemail messages of hundreds of celebrities, politicians, and horrendously even families of some victims of crime. This has undoubtedly damaged newspapers as a whole. It's led to the setting up of an inquiry headed by Lord Justice Leveson in the High Court, which is sitting today and may well dominate tomorrow's headlines in the newspapers. It's clear that the problem is not just about the behaviour of newspapers, but goes far wider. It's about their close relationship with both politicians and also the police. And although a lot's come out, I sense there's a lot more to come. The hacking scandal has shone a light on the need for a much tougher watchdog than the current Press Complaints Commission to supervise the media. That body is being wound down. It's been completely inadequate. It was misled during the hacking, its own inquiries into the hacking controversy and found out nothing about it. It's financed by the industry. It's not really an independent regulator. In its old form, just abolished, it had serving national newspaper editors playing a key role on its committees. Quite rightly, it's being wound up. We in the industry have come up with some proposals to give it more teeth, to perhaps impose fines on newspapers who break a new, tougher code of conduct that everyone would have to sign up to. But it's not clear that Lord Justice Leveson, the judge heading the inquiry, will endorse the system that we in the newspaper world are proposing. He may well come up with his own ideas for a new regulatory system. Despite all the criticism, I still believe that our free press is a force for public good, and it's very important that it remains free. The irony of closing the News of the World, which was shut by Rupert Murdoch because of the hacking scandal, was that in recent years, after the phone hacking took place, that paper, News of the World, had broken some very important stories which were undoubtedly in the public interest, not least one that comes to mind about the corruption in Pakistani cricket. The Sunday Times, another Rupert Murdoch-owned paper, uncovered important stories such as alleged wrongdoing in FIFA, football's world governing body, and recently a story in the Sunday Times about Conservative Party fundraising in which donors appeared to offer access to David Cameron, the Prime Minister, in return for giving money to his party. The Sunday Times and my own paper, The Independent, have shone a light on the rather murky world of lobbyists, companies whose primary purpose, unlike that of newspapers, is to influence government decisions and policies for their clients in the business world. And the other key point is that the phone hacking scandal itself was uncovered by The Guardian, another newspaper, with backup from other papers like my own. So all these important disclosures might not have been possible if we'd had the more restrictive regulatory regime which is now being demanded in the wake of the hacking scandal by some politicians and pressure groups, which would sadly and unwittingly curb investigative journalism. So I would argue that newspapers still play a vital role in shining a light on parts of the political system that some politicians would rather keep hidden, not least the way parties raise the money they need to function, political parties, and the role of the lobbyists that I mentioned. When the Leveson inquiry was set up last summer, some politicians couldn't help coming up to me in the corridors at Westminster across the road and said that a process of natural justice is now at work. They were very upset by the way newspapers had covered the revelations about their parliamentary expenses, which led to a few MPs losing their seats and a handful actually going to prison. A lot of politicians remained very bruised by that, felt it was unfair the way the media covered it. So they, not all of them, but a small number of them, do see this Leveson inquiry into the future regulation of the press as a a kind of payback time, a chance for the political world to get revenge on the press. I think it's a rather silly way of looking at things. It's obvious that the current system of self-regulation of the press has failed. Nobody in my industry defends the present outdated system. We do need a proper watchdog with teeth. But I think that the public interest would be served clearly by a tougher independent watchdog with teeth composed of people who are not on the payroll of newspapers. But what some politicians want is statutory regulation involving the government, involving politicians. I don't think we should go for that. I think to go from one extreme to the other would be a huge mistake, not least because statutory regulation and control would struggle to keep pace with rapidly changing technology. It wouldn't be easy to pass a law on how to regulate Twitter, for example, let alone whatever comes next. More importantly, in my view, there'd be a grave risk of throwing out the baby with the bathwater and inhibiting the best of British investigative journalism, an outcome which would only harm the public interest. So those are my thoughts on the state of the relationship and the rather battered state of the industry in which I work. I hope you found that vaguely interesting, and would be delighted to answer any questions.